Hey there, Rob Lauder with churchphotographers.com here, and I'm going to show you in just a few minutes how to use our Lightroom Essentials presets pack. And so I'm going to show you 3 different images and how these presets will affect those images, how you use those presets to get some really cool, really sharp, vivid images out of your photos that come straight off your camera. And so I'm going to show you 3 different images. I'm going to show you one outdoors, I'm going to show you one in the church lobby, and one in the sanctuary where the worship leaders are on stage, and how these different presets will affect these images. So without further ado, here we go. So here's the first image that I want to show you. We just launched a new campus at our church this past weekend, and I was there to cover the action. We had this cool step and repeat banner out there. We had pop signs, we had the whole 9 yards, got people engaged. It was super fun. And so this is the first image that we're going to take a look at. Before we start, I'm going to point out that I am using an iPad. I'm using Lightroom CC, and so these are Lightroom presets. You can use these either on your mobile device, or you can use them on your desktop. The process should be the same, and we install these presets using the instructions that we included when you downloaded them. And so the first thing I'm going to do with each one of these images is go into my presets tab. I'm going to go down to my user presets, and then we'll see those presets here loaded into Lightroom. I call them, the 2 basic setup ones are called Basic Setup Concert and Basic Setup Portrait. Those will do 2 different things. And then also we're going to talk about crushing the blacks with a matte tone curve. You see that as the basic flat tone curve, light, medium, and strong. We'll show you what those do. So first off, let's start with the basic setup plugins, or the basic setup presets, because these are the presets that I use on literally every image I process, depending on one of 2 looks that I want to convey. These presets are based on my preferences and the way that my style typically flows out in my editing process, and these represent things that I would do over and over and over again that would waste a lot of time. So I'm like, I'm just going to make a preset out of those. And I did, and I'm giving it to you to save a lot of time as well. So those 2 presets are the concert and portrait. Concert could also be vivid, whereas portrait could be more flat. Those are just typically what I use them for. My favorite of all is concert. And so let me show you what each one of these do. So I'm going to tap that basic setup concert preset. Notice that the image becomes a little bit more vivid, it kind of pops a little more, gets a little contrast. We get a little bit of a vignette there, and then we get a little bit of sharpening as well, which we'll talk about. The second one is the portrait. The portrait is a little less contrasty, a little less vivid. This is going to be more like if I'm doing a portrait, like a headshot or something like that, where clarity might draw out imperfections in skin tone or make somebody look blotchy or something like that. In general, if I'm shooting close-ups of people, portrait is good. If I'm shooting groups or if I'm shooting anything else, I go with concert as my go-to. So again, show you the difference between those. There's concert, a little more vivid, a little bit more contrasty, a little bit more clarity, and then portrait, a little less vivid, a little less contrasty, and it's going to be good for close-ups, etc. So I'm going to use the concert preset to edit this image. So now that I've selected it, I'm going to hit done, and that applies it to my image. That's the very first thing I do when I open any image, is I use one of my basic setup presets, because that's going to be my starting point. Let's walk through what that preset actually did. So if we look at the right-hand column here, we see the profile has changed to Adobe Vivid from Adobe Color. That gives it that nice vivid color profile. Nothing happens in our exposure, because we're going to do that on an image-by-image basis. Nothing happens within our color tab, because again, it's an image-by-image basis. Under effects, though, we do see some clarity. Let's show you what clarity does. Clarity is edge contrast. And so if I pump this all the way up, you'll see how those edges really start to get kind of like that crunchy, grungy look. So if you are a concert photographer, that's probably where you want to go. But I just add a little bit of clarity to an image to give it a little bit of pop, and that's the way I like it. Also, notice that we give a little bit of a vignette. Vignette is that cool shadow around the outside of the image that draws your attention to the center. I actually push the midpoint of that vignette out a little bit, so you see the midpoint value change. And then also I add a little bit of feathering to make it so the vignette's not quite as harsh. So those are my preferences there under effects. And then under detail, we're going to do a few things as well. We're going to add some sharpening to the image. Sharpening will make It does what it sounds like. It makes the image just a little bit sharper. It adds a little bit of a mask to it, which I'll talk about here in a minute, and then also adds just a little bit of noise reduction, because I know I'm going to do that with pretty much every image I shoot anyway. And so those are built into the preset. Then finally, under optics, it's going to enable lens corrections, which if you turn that on and off, you'll see that the image very slightly changes. That's just taking your lens profile and taking like the irregularities within lenses and kind of correcting those out. And then removing CA, or chromatic aberration, which is some of the weird colors you can kind of get on the edge of an image depending on your lens. So that's everything that the basic setup concert preset does. Now let's finish editing this image now that we've applied the preset. So the very first thing I do from there is I hit auto settings. Sometimes this works really well and it gives me exactly the exposure I want. Sometimes it goes completely off the rails, which we'll probably see here with some of the worship images. And it's like, that's not what I wanted. So here I hit auto, and it actually did a pretty good job. So let's undo that and redo that. Notice that under my light tab, basically all it's doing is taking my highlights down a little bit, bringing my shadows up. And so if we kind of flip between the undo and redo mode, I like how it's kind of brought up my shadows, gets the image a little bit more light. Here, about all I would probably do to this image is probably bring up my shadows just a little bit more to make that image just a touch brighter. And from an exposure standpoint, I think that's really good. Color as well, I have it as shot. We can kind of experiment with an auto setting here. I think that's a little warmer than I would like it. It was an overcast day, so 5,600 to 6,000-ish is about where I want to be with my white balance. And so I'm actually really happy with the white balance here. I wouldn't mess with that much. And so I'm pretty happy with this image in general. Notice that those faces are nice and sharp. The color in our blue here is nice and vivid. The contrast in our letters is nice and crisp. And so this is I'm really happy with how this has come out. The only thing I would do to finish this image are one, straighten it up just a little bit, and then two, we'll talk about noise reduction and masking. So for the straightening, there's a couple ways you can do it. You can kind of crop it and then just like rotate it to where you want to. I'm not going to do that because I have this nice square element in the back. My auto upright might get me exactly where I need to be. So I'm going to hit auto upright, and now it's going to take, it's barely imperceptible. If you kind of toggle between the undo and the redo, you can see how it's just straightened it up very slightly. That's because I've got this nice square backdrop and it has good angles to work with. And so once I've straightened that up, I'm just going to crop in to center the backdrop in the frame, and that's pretty good. I'm happy with that. This isn't a complete editing tutorial. This is just kind of a how to use these presets tutorial. We'll do a lot more in-depth editing stuff as we go on. So that's image number one. If we go from the original here, you can see, boom, we've got a lot more vibrance, a lot more color, and some clarity there on the edges. So that's how to use that in an outdoor setting. The last thing, before we move on, is those tone curves. So tone curves are designed to get that crushed black look. So when the blacks aren't quite black, when they're kind of gray, when it kind of looks like, this is a printed on a matte piece of paper kind of look, that's where these tone curves come in. And so these tone curves I've got labeled as light, medium, and strong, and it's going to affect how much those blacks get crushed. So I'm going to start off with a strong one just so you can see what happens. And so I'm going to click that. Notice that you kind of like, if you look at the shadows here and the blues and the blacks, as I go back and forth between those, you lose a little contrast, but you definitely get that matte look. And so this is like a very heavy matte tone curve. But then I've also got the light version and the medium version. So you can kind of go through these to preference. Some churches like that, like really super matte look. I think it's really cool, but it doesn't really fit with our overall style. So I'll often use a medium tone curve. So I'm going to apply that medium tone curve and hit done. And then under the light tab, you can actually see what this is doing. So if you hit this little squiggly line right here, notice that This is the representation of, like, the left side is shadows, the right side is highlights, and how intense each area of the shadows and highlights are. So basically, as I want to have a more of that crushed black look, I can just basically slide this slider up and play with it, and that's pretty much all we're doing. So there's like a super crushed black look. That's kind of ruined our image doing that, but you just kind of see what this tone curve is doing. And basically all we're doing is taking it from, like, our blacks are super black to, we're just going to raise that up a little bit and crush those blacks, give us that matte look that we're going for. And so I'm just going to undo that. There's our medium tone curve. That's it for that image. All right, here we go. Image number 2. This is obviously on stage, one of our worship leaders in the middle of a moment of worship. One thing that I encourage photographers to do is don't capture moments of performance, capture moments of worship. And so hands up, eyes closed, that sort of thing, where our people are not just singing, not just performing, but worshiping the Lord on stage. That's one of these moments. And so we're going to show you how to use those same presets to accomplish some of the same functions here. But notice that this image is very bright. There's lots of natural light available. This image is very dark, and it's got not as much natural light. We've got a lot more artificial light and just less light in general. So we'll show you how those tone curves can really affect these darker images in just a moment. But what's the first thing we do? Basic setup. So I'm going to hit my preset tab. To go down to my basic setup. Again, I'm going to use the concert one on this because I like the vividness of it. And notice, like, all right, that doesn't look too hot to start, but we got to trust the process. This is just the basic setup. From here, I'm going to hit my auto edit button, and that's going to change my exposure, white, contrast, whites, blacks, highlights, shadows, etc. And I'm guessing this probably isn't going to go as well as I would like. So I'm going to hit that. Yeah, so now we've got, like, notice on her face, it's like super bright, super overexposed, because, like, that's the brightest point of the image, and Lightroom is trying to make this whole image properly exposed. It's not thinking, oh, hey, that's a girl's face and her face shouldn't be glowing. So in order to counteract that, there's a couple of things we can do. One, we can decrease the overall exposure, or we can try to decrease the highlights. I'm going to try the latter. Let's pull these highlights down just a touch, and then I think I'll pull down the overall exposure just a touch as well. Might bring up my shadows just a little bit to bring that background out just a touch, but she is the focal point, obviously. Then also notice that the color temperature of this light is pretty orange. So I'm going to go under color. I'm going to cool that off just a hair, maybe about there. And I really like the colors in this image. I like how we've got some red light here in her hair. And so I'm going to pull up the vibrance on that just a little bit. I see some green tones in her face too, so I'm gonna make it just a touch purple. All right, this is just a quick edit. Again, this isn't a comprehensive editing tutorial. This is just how to use these tone curves or these presets. So that's taking us from here to here. Notice we particularly like stuff like having that vivid color profile pulls out those colors that we have on stage, which I really like. Having that clarity makes things like the texture of her hair and the texture of her jacket pop a little bit, and then also separates her from the background just a little bit. This is a pretty cool leatherish jacket, so having the stitches and seams and stuff there pop just a hair with that clarity is cool to me. Again, personal preference all the way. If we were to have processed this with our portrait setup, it would be a much flatter, much less poppy image, and so if that's your style, go with that route. But I love the contrasty, clarity kind of look. So that's where we're going to go. I'm going to go back into my presets now, scroll down to my tone curve, and I'm going to show you how on a darker image with lots of blacks, because if this tone curve is crushing the blacks, the amount of black that we have to work with will determine just how strong that effect looks. So on this, I'm going to actually, let's pop back to this image here. On this one, if I were to go with that strong crushed black tone curve, I can leave it here and it's okay. It's pretty matte looking, but overall the image looks still good. If I were to use that same strong tone curve on this one, however, like it's gonna be like completely flat. See how it just like almost went like, you know, all of the detail is now lost because there's so much black in this image. And so that's why I'm going to start over again here and walk you up from here's light. So just a little bit of crushing on those blacks. Here's medium, a little bit more, and here's strong, a whole lot more of that tone curve. So again, light, medium, strong. I'm a good middle of the road kind of guy, so I like that medium, kind of slightly crushed black look, but we still have that detail and pop that comes from the basic setup preset that we used. So there's image number 2. Image number 3, this is a straight off camera. This looks super flat. We're going to show you how the basic setup concert preset will make this image pop like all sorts of cool stuff. So this was just in the lobby afterward. These girls had come out of our student ministry. They got these "You Are Sent" balloons, and they're like, "Hey, can you take our picture?" And so it's like, "Hey, this is like awesome branding." So absolutely, get those balloons up here. Let's take a photo. Again, same principle, same thought process. Very first thing, basic setup. Here's portrait. So it's going to be flatter, less contrasty. Here's concert. So notice like some of those skin tones start to pop. I like that, like her yellow shirt starts to pop, the blues and the denim start to pop. So that's where that vivid profile, I think, just makes everything pop and looks really cool. The clarity kind of makes the image pop a little bit as well. So I'm going to apply that. That's my starting point. Again, next thing I'm going to do, hit the edit, the auto button. Whoa, way overexposed on our subject, because just like indoor in the sanctuary, we've got all these darks around them, and Lightroom is trying to average it all out. So I'm like, Lightroom, chill. Like, our subject is here in the foreground. Let's expose for our foreground. So again, I'm going to pull my highlights down just a touch here. I'm going to pull my overall exposure down just a touch, and maybe pull my shadows up a little bit to where we get a nice, nice exposure on the subject, and the background isn't completely washed out or dark. So we went from here to here, properly exposed, got a little bit of extra pop. Sometimes, like, you know, with her yellow shirt, like, I don't want to draw attention to it, but I want to draw out some of these colors. So I'm going to bump up the vibrance just a hair. The difference between vibrance and saturation: vibrance will increase the overall colors, but avoid skin tones, so you don't get Oompa Loompas. Whereas saturation, if I just bump this up, we get like completely oversaturated Oompa Loompa faces. Not good for business. I might actually add just a bit of contrast into this image too. And let's check our white balance. I feel like it's a little orangey, so pull out, shift to blue, just a touch. And that looks good to me. One thing you can always do is go into this color mix and kind of play with colors as well. So if I wanted to like make that orange shirt pop, or that yellow shirt pop a little bit, I could increase the saturation in the yellows. If I want to make the denim pop a little bit, I could increase the luminance on that denim and see how that kind of affects that. Again, this is just back to personal edit style. So that's good. And then the last thing I want to do is I want to add that matte tone curve. Again, I'll walk you through the 3 levels to show you how, again, we got a lot of blacks here around the back, so it'll have a more pronounced effect. Show you strong to begin with, you know, super matte look, medium, and light, medium, strong. As usual, I really like that medium value. The last thing I might do is pull up these shadows a little bit more so you can see a little bit more detail in the background. And then let's just crop in to center our subjects, and boom. So that's 3 images edited with our essential Lightroom presets pack. Notice my preference is all about that poppy clarity look, but you can also use the portrait look to get a less intense, less vibrant image. But here's one. We started with this image using our presets we got here. Number 2, started here using our presets. We got to this cool, like, colorful vibrant image. And number 3, we started here very flat, very average, boring photo, and then we were able to draw out some of the color and make the subjects pop a little bit more too. So there's 3 images edited with these presets. I want to see what you can produce with them. So if you use these presets, go through, edit a few images, and either post them in a comment on this video or send them our way at rob@churchphotographers.com. Love to see what you create with these plugins that we've created for you. That's all we got time for today. Hope to see you next time.